Hello, everyone. So today I'm going to be talking about WordPress 5.7. WordPress 5.7 is slated to be released in the beginning of March, so pretty soon. We just had WordPress Beta 3 get released a couple of hours ago, so now is a great time to test WordPress 5.7 for yourselves. As always, what I recommend is use your host's staging environment or development preview. And what you can do is you can go to the WordPress plugins directory, go to Add New, and search for the beta testing plugin. And you'll find a plugin here called WordPress Beta Tester. You'll see an install button and then an activate button. And then what you can do is you can go down into your tools menu, and you'll get a new menu there called beta testing. And what you want to do is opt into bleeding edge, and then you can opt into beta/RC. And then you can go over to your dashboard and update, and you'll get the latest WordPress 5.7 beta. Again, I would only recommend doing this on your sites like staging environment or development or testing environment, but pretty much all of the hosts have that available now. If you do find issues, you can report them. There's a little link here. And there is also another link to the alpha and beta forum that gets active once the betas start getting a little bit more active. But so this is a place to report if you run into any issues when you're testing. So with that being said, let's jump into some of the new WordPress 5.7 features. The first thing I'm going to be taking a look at this time is some Gutenberg stuff. And then I'm going to touch on a couple of other small things that are going into this release as well. So what's new with Gutenberg? We've got a whole bunch of stuff. I guess a medium amount of stuff to cover here. The first thing is a change to the inserter, or a couple of different changes to the inserter. Now you can properly drag blocks directly out from the inserter straight into your post content. So I can have a new heading here. And this also works with block patterns, which is really cool. So if I want to drag and drop, but I want this to go above my new heading, I can do that really easily now. Oh, there we go. Another new thing is that when I'm searching here, the block patterns, the blocks, my reusable blocks, they all show up in one search interface. So you don't need to go through every single different tab. If I'm here searching for links, I can see my block patterns that my theme makes available for me, as well as the buttons block and the social icons block. And if I had any reusable blocks here that match for links as well, they'd all show up in this one interface. So you don't need to go tabbing back and forth trying to find something. One of my favorite new features in this release is a change to the cover block. So if you don't know, the cover block is a really versatile block that allows you to put like different media or background colors and a large amount of text. And a new feature that this got is something that I think looks really cool, which is a full screen mode. So I'm going to change this over to full width, which we've had always. But now we also see this new button here called toggle full height. And so when I toggle full height, Gutenberg gets really smart. And what it does is it says, OK, I'm going to fill this background image here up to the entire height of the person's browser window. This is kind of a little bit difficult to demo with the screen sharing stuff because it'll get all wonky when I start moving my screen share back and forth. But you can try this out for yourself if you install the WordPress 5.7 preview. So let's add a little bit more text to this. Let's give it a heading. Let's maybe make this center aligned. And let's grab some buttons. And so now if we take a look at the site here, we have a cover block that stretches up and fills the entire available height. So I think that's a really neat feature and can give some really cool layouts. And that's available just from the cover block right now. But I think there are plans to bring this to other kind of blocks that could get full height and things like that. Another really big change is to reusable blocks. In this release, the whole kind of flow of reusable blocks changes, and in some really cool ways. So I'm going to create, let's say, a reusable block for signing up for my social media newsletter or something like that. So let's transform this into a heading, maybe an H3. Let's center it. Let's put this into a group block. And then we can add our call to action button. So let's say sign up. And again, we want to put that in the center. And let's say we want to give our full group block the border treatment from my 2021 theme. And let's say we want to give it a custom background color. So I think that's looking pretty cool. And so we can update it. And we can see it on the front of our website. And so now when I go to convert this to a reusable block, I do it through the same way. Add to reusable blocks. Well, well, this is a beta. Let's see if it's able to recover from itself. Let's try one more time. Nope. Well, that's unfortunate. Let me try something. Let's try doing this in a different post, maybe. There we go. I don't know why that page is broken, but it is. But so we'll give our reusable block its title. And you'll see the UI already is a little bit different. Previously, we would have the kind of button here that had space for a title and a save button and a cancel button, if I'm remembering correctly. But now we can set the title through the block inspector area. So we call this newsletter sign up. If you're really observant, you'll notice that there's a change to the update button. And this is really cool. So if I click update now, I'm going to see that my post has been modified. And it's also going to tell me that my newsletter sign up block has been modified. So I'm going to save both of these. And it does the saving of both of them. And we can take a look at our post here. And we can see it in action. But so now if I make a change, let's say sign up for my newsletter, maybe we want to capitalize newsletter for some reason. I'm sure there's someone really into grammar telling me why that's a terrible idea. But we'll now see if we go to our update block, or our update button, excuse me, we'll see that the reusable block has changed and we can save it here. If I said, let's go ahead and, for example, delete this demo content and uncheck the reusable block. When I go to save, the reusable block hasn't updated yet. And if I go here, though, I'll see my old newsletter block, but the other updates my post have been kept. And then when I'm ready, I can save that reusable block. Now, what's really, really neat about this system is for something that maybe we can talk about in a separate talk. But what this functionality isn't just limited to reusable blocks. It's for any post type that you want to embed into the editor. So there have been kind of complaints, let's say, with Gutenberg, where doing things in the old model, let's say we had a custom post type called testimonials, then you had a shortcode testimonial, and you would do all the editing over there, and then you would bring in the shortcodes and do all that kind of stuff, so you have a clear separation of data and things like that. What this kind of saving mechanism lets us do is create those custom post type entries inside of the regular WordPress Gutenberg editor, and give our clients a really rich experience for creating custom post types. But to them, it just looks like a regular WordPress block. And so I think the system that this unlocks is incredibly cool. It's used throughout full site editing, which we've talked about before. But there's some other really powerful ways to use it. And I think it's something that we can probably touch on more, or go into more in depth on, in a future meetup talk. So the next thing that I'm going to talk about are variations. And there have been a couple of different changes to variations. So what variations are is they let us have one block that has lots of different appearances, so to speak. We have a Twitter embed, a YouTube embed, a WordPress embed, SoundCloud, Spotify. There are even more of those. Under the hood, these are all the same block. And previously with Gutenberg, it would kind of appear that way too once you got into the editing interface. But what's new in WordPress 5.7 is it remembers what kind of embed this is. It remembers what kind of variation of block is. So I stick with the YouTube icon, the YouTube block title, the YouTube block description, whereas previously this would just say it's a generic embed block. And this is has a lot of kind of different implications for different blocks. One of them is the buttons block. So let's have 1 button and 2 button. So what's new to WordPress 5.7 is the buttons block now has variations. And part of this variation system where it can keep track of variations is a new transform to variation. So I can now change this to a new feature in 5.7 called a vertical buttons group. And that's all done with a variation system. That's new to 5.7. So that's a new cool feature that buttons gets. You'll also kind of notice while we're on the topic of buttons, let's transform this back into horizontal, that there have been some other kind of cleanups here. It's now much more clear how you want to center buttons. It uses the same center content justification control that some other places do instead of putting it in this alignment area. So now you can kind of properly have a wide aligned with center aligned buttons. And I think it makes a lot more sense when you're editing it. Another cool feature for the buttons block is this new width control. So I can say how much of the container, how much of the total block space do I want to have taken up by this button? So if I wanted to, I can set this up to have one button that's much bigger than the other one, or I could set this one also to be 50%, and they would both fill up their entire containers. Doing this before was almost difficult to almost impossible, but this is a really neat new Gutenberg feature. And you can see as it stacks up, they're taking over the entire wide width of the block that I give it. So we can take a look at that on the front of the site. Some more changes have been made that also kind of touch on variations is with the social icons block. So the social icons block is a great way for listing out all the places that you're on social media, so like Twitter and LinkedIn and such. So let's say we want to add a Twitter link. This now remembers that this social icon that I'm displaying is for Twitter instead of just being a generic social icon. And we could add another one. Some other cool changes here is that social icons can also now have a size. So if I want to, I can make these really small. I can make them large or even huge. So we get those new size controls. What we also get are ways to give this custom colors. So if I want to, I can ignore the kind of default colors that this get from their branding, and I can override them with my own. So we can set a custom background color for each of these and a custom color for the icon. And that goes beyond just like the regular button styles. A couple of other things to touch on that are new in Gutenberg for 5.7. We have a new inline formatting option. So let's say you're writing a post telling someone how to use Gutenberg. So I'm going to say to save your post, press Command plus S. There is a cool HTML tag called KBD for keyboard that some themes will theme in different ways. And that's now available to select from the inline formatting menu. So I can set this as a keyboard input and set this one as a keyboard input. What some themes will do is they'll display that kind of like a button. In 2021, it kind of just makes it the kind of code text formatting. But that's a new small option there that might be helpful if you're writing kind of more technical posts and things like that. There's also been a big change to the preferences menu for Gutenberg. So if we open up preferences, you'll see it's been completely redesigned. It looks really, really awesome now. Before, this would just be a giant list that you had to scroll through, but it's properly kind of like separated into different tabs. We have a new control here for displaying the block breadcrumbs. So if you're looking carefully at the bottom of my screen, you can kind of see it in action there. It's enabled by default, but now if you want to, you can remove that. Another cool thing is display button labels. This was added in WordPress 5.6, but what's new, if you notice here, all the icons have been changed out for text describing what it actually does. But this in 5.7 has now been extended to the block toolbar. So if you're more comfortable using the text, you can do that instead of relying on the button icons. Is there anything else I want to talk about with Gutenberg? I think those are the main things. There are a whole bunch of things that went into this release for Gutenberg, like hundreds of bug fixes. I think this covers 9.2 to 9.9, if I'm remembering correctly, of Gutenberg releases. So there's a whole bunch of stuff here and some small tweaks that I didn't cover. But those are the kind of main headline Gutenberg features that are coming in WordPress 5.7. The other thing that I want to touch on is a new feature in site health. So if you've been paying really close attention to my site URL, you'll see that it's telling me it's not secure. I've been browsing and working on my site with HTTP. What's new to site health in WordPress 5.7 is a new site health report that tells me when my website is not using HTTPS. What's really, really, really cool about this is that site health now also is able to say, okay, you're not using HTTPS, but it turns out that your site already supports HTTPS. This can happen sometimes, like if you're on a host that rolls out like Let's Encrypt, for instance, across all their sites, but you didn't update your site to use the HTTPS URL. Site health can now detect this and automatically move your site over to using HTTPS. So if I click on this button, it has updated my site to HTTPS to use the HTTPS URLs. You'll see I'm now being served over HTTPS. If we go over into settings, you can see that these are HTTPS URLs now. And what's really cool, let's go back to that 5.7 post. Oh, there it was. There are no mixed content warnings. So there are no mixed content warnings here. If you remember, like when I created this image, I was on an HTTP URL, not HTTPS. So the image got inserted as HTTP. But what WordPress is doing now is it's automatically converting all of the URLs that it finds in my content to use HTTPS, so you don't get any mixed content warnings. And it makes that migration process a whole lot simpler. In some cases, your host might not like have HTTPS. It's difficult to say over and over again. Your host might not have HTTPS available for your website, but what hosts can now do is they can also include a button instead of the button to have WordPress do it automatically. That can link them out to your hosting panel for configuring HTTPS and things like that. And also to clarify, it's not like buying and configuring an SSL certificate for you. HTTPS still needs to be available to your server, but the content migration process and the WordPress side of things gets a whole lot simpler. Three other small things I'm really just going to talk about because they're not really easy to demo. Lazy loading was added, I think, in WordPress 5.5 for images. In WordPress 5.7, or was it 5.6? It was one of those. In WordPress 5.7, this is now available for iframes. So if you have a whole lot of, like, let's say, YouTube embeds on your page and the browser supports it, those won't get loaded onto your website until the user scrolls to them. So that can give them better performance. Second to last, really more for developers, there's a new WP Robots API. The kind of like headlining feature of this is that it allows for, in the Google search results, to have a giant kind of image displayed if you're using images in your blog posts. Google will now try and pick that up and show a kind of richer preview in the search engine results section if it's available to you. If you're using those images and Google has decided to bless you with that nice algorithm change. But now WordPress supports that out of the box. And lastly, what you might have noticed is that everything looks a little bit different color-wise. There's been a lot of work to reduce the amount of colors that WordPress uses in WP Admin to a more considered and intentional set of colors. So there are some tweaks all around to like the grays that are used and the blues here and all those different things. Things look slightly different because we've everything has been unified to a much smaller set. I think it looks really, really awesome. But if you get jarred when you're viewing your WordPress, you're like, well, what's up with this? That's what it is. Colors have just been tweaked. But it's really cool. And part of this process is also setting up something that'll be even cooler in the future, which is the potential to make all these themes use CSS variables. So we've had in the profile like different color schemes like this. You might notice that oftentimes your plugins that you use might not respect these themes, or it's really difficult to provide other custom themes. This color consolidation is one of the first steps to making that whole system a lot better. So I think it's worth it from a whole bunch of different fronts. But yeah, those are the main headlining features for WordPress 5.7. And yeah, I'll be happy to take any question y'all have.
All right, Tim, that was awesome. So most of the questions are coming about that HTTPS change. So the first one is Jack Kleinfeld's asking, is it the equivalent to like the really simple SSL plugin where it's parsing everything to be SSL?
I think so. I don't know if it does everything that really simple SSL does, but it's in that same vein. I think there's some other couple of extra features that really simple SSL does, but I think most of these things now will be done by WordPress core out of the box. So yeah, like doing that mixed content handling and things like that. It's replacing it in anywhere links appear, I think, in the post content, widgets, custom CSS. I think those are the main bits. So it's possible that there are some other ways that a mixed content warning could appear, depending on like if you have a custom theme, for instance, and your theme is like loading Google Analytics over HTTP instead of HTTPS. There's nothing WordPress is going to do to correct that for you, at least at this point. And it won't automatically detect it for you, but I think really simple SSL does. So it's not rendered completely obsolete by any means, but I think the WordPress core feature should now serve the majority of those needs.
Did you say custom fields?
No, custom themes. So like if you have in your theme, for instance, a link to an image or a CSS file that is hard coded to use HTTP instead of HTTPS, then WordPress isn't going to be able to correct that for you. It's just things that are dynamic in the content, the custom CSS. And when I'm talking about custom CSS, I'm talking about the custom CSS and the customizer. It's this additional CSS area.
Got it. Could you give us a little bit more background on how it's converting the images to HTTPS? Is that?
Yeah, so what it's doing is it's filtering it all at runtime. So if I go into this page here, we should see that the URL is still HTTP. But what's happening is WordPress is when the page is being rendered, it's replacing it automatically to be HTTPS. The way this check is done is really, really lightweight. It's just doing a very simple string replace in the entire content for the HTTP version of the URL and changing to the HTTPS version of the URL and just for your site URL and home URL. So it won't affect other links in your post. So their performance impact is negligible. And it means that WordPress doesn't have to do complex upgrade routines to update all thousands and thousands of posts in your site or anything like that. It just happens on the fly in a pretty quick manner. There are some more details if you're curious about this, and I'll make sure we get the link in the meetup comments about how it works. There is an option that gets set. I think it's HTTPS migration required. when you use that site health button. So if you want to, you can do this site health thing. And if for some reason you are really concerned about the migration happening on the fly, you can use something like WP CLI's search replace tool, or your host company's search and replace tool to replace all that stuff, and then disable that option. But that's something that's a little more for technical users, I would say. And I imagine there'll probably be a plugin coming that'll help you control that stuff.
So the two things it does is it changes your site URL and your WordPress URL on the settings page, and then it filters any HTTP URLs that are in your content.
Exactly, yeah. Your content widgets and custom CSS. It checks essentially if you can do that. Like one of the things you could run into, let's say my URL here is HTTP instead of HTTPS, and HTTPS wasn't supported, but I tried to change this to HTTPS and update. You would very much brick your website. It would because you'll be trying to load that site over HTTPS and it won't work at all, and you won't be able to get back in and all that kind of stuff. And so what Site Health is now doing is it's detecting whether HTTPS is supported before it does that, so you don't accidentally break your entire WordPress install. So it provides a nice kind of like one-click button experience for doing all that.
Awesome. All right. Any other questions before we let Tim go? And again, this video will be recorded, so you can check it out on YouTube/WordPress NYC. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Tim.